Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Think on These Things podcast.
Hello.
And we're so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. A little late to the party this week. I want to be on schedule. And we were just a tiny bit late this week, just by a day. Father's Day kind of got us it's been a busy couple of weeks, so.
We know it has been for you guys, too.
Oh, yes. We know y'all are fighting the busy bugs, so we hope today's going to be a blessing. We got a cool topic coming up. As always, thank you to the great people, our friends at Biblos, for making this podcast and the great things on the Biblos network possible.
It's amazing.
Some amazing content on there.
Yes.
Some of the most recent, like the one by Dr. Galindo and his son Sam on the podcast, were incredible. Then the Oneness one by Brother Urshan was incredible. So go check them out if you haven't. Incredible content. So let's jump right in today. And obviously, it's always back there, so there's no surprise what we're talking about. We're going to be talking about the real versus the ideal. And we're going to talk about expectations versus reality.
Yeah.
And more importantly, what do we do when the real doesn't match the ideal? How do we not just build resilience to those things, but how do we overcome those things? So let's jump right in and let's talk a little bit about what this means. So if you had to break it down for simple-minded people like myself, the simplest you can get, what would you say ideal versus real would be?
Sure. Well, I think there's two ways of looking at this. We're talking about the real versus the ideal. We can look at this in terms of the internal, the things that we expect of ourselves versus what we actually accomplish and actually do.
That's good.
And then it can also be external versus like in terms of what people expect us to accomplish and then what we're actually capable of doing for them.
That's so good. Why don't we talk about the internal? I feel like the internal is a major monster that people fight. And there's multiple reasons why we fight internal expectation, right? There's the reason of we see what other people are doing, so we base value. We place value on achieving internal expectations based on what other people accomplish. Then we end up putting a lot of pressure on ourselves that can be detrimental in the long run. So let's talk about those internal expectations. Maybe talk about where we can derive those from sometimes, those expectations. And then what do we do when those internal expectations don't measure up? Because those sometimes can be the most hurtful internal expectations and not reaching those goals.
Well, I think that we can establish right from the get-go that having expectations of yourself can be a really healthy thing. It can be a positive thing. It's a good thing. Like, I expect to get out of bed every day by a certain time and accomplish certain things. Like I like to make my bed and I have this whole morning routine that I expect out of myself before I leave my house for the day. And I think that's a very healthy, I think that's a healthy expectation. And, but then there's expectations that we have of ourselves that become unrealistic, and we expect ourselves to do things or accomplish things that maybe we aren't quite ready for yet. And it's all about how we handle our successes and failures that make a big difference.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think one of the questions I kind of have in that I want to talk about the handling of those successes and failures, or maybe it's not even a failure. Like I think calling it a failure means that you did not accomplish something you should have done.
I like to call it a learning experience.
That's what my chemistry professor that I dropped out of class called it as well. Learning. You learn more from your mistakes, or you learn more from failing than you do from succeeding.
Oh my!
Anyway, that brings back some trauma. Maybe I need to talk about that.
Yes, we do.
But I want to talk about like the internal expectations. The setting of those for like before we get to how to deal with not realizing them, because I think that's one thing that we need to kind of grind out in the beginning is where do our expectations come from? Especially those internal expectations, where do they come from? Is it something that's in the ether somewhere? Is it divine, like it should be? Like, I think that's one of the things we'll talk about too. But where do those expectations come from versus where should they come from?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I would say a lot of times we start deriving our expectations at a very early age when we're kind of socialized and nurtured by our parents or our caretakers. Then we start developing a sense of expectation based on what others are, like I said, our parents, our caretakers expected out of us. And those kind of influence our internal expectations of what we expect from ourselves as we begin developing. A lot of times we'll hear like young adolescents, maybe in school, they'll put a lot of pressure on themselves to make good grades because they feel like maybe their parents, they want their parents' approval, and they feel like if they don't make a certain grade, their parents are going to be very upset at them. And so then it kind of sets off this trajectory of building up all this anxiety over a grade where their parents, most parents, I know my parents were like, as long as you're doing your very best, I know you're trying the best you can, even if it's not a 100 or a 98, as long as you've tried your best, then we're very proud of you for trying.
What do you think? So that's a great talking about the formation. What about teenage adult? Like, what does that look like? Especially today. This is one of the things that I think me and my father-in-law have been having this conversation regarding mental health and different things. And it's a different conversation to have today than it was, 20, 30, 40 years ago. I mean, maybe even as short as 10 years ago. So, like, what does that look like now for, teenager, preteen, young adult?
Oh, yeah.
What is those internal expectations? Where do we derive them today?
So it's more than just family.
Yeah.
So it extends. And now our expectations, feeling of what's expected of us is a much bigger source than maybe it was, 15, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. Because now there's not only maybe like a source of family derived expectations, and then like peer group expectations, societal expectations, and the societal expectation part of what's expected of me socially has become much bigger now, because now we're connected on
larger social groups,
social media. We're connected even more on our phones now. Even just individuals, we're more connected.
Work, different things.
I mean, if you scroll through someone's contact list, now there's like hundreds of people.
Not thousands,
like I'm going to date myself here.
Oh boy.
Like when I was younger, our group of connections was, pretty low because of all the social media and cell phones. Cell phones were really like new when I was just like I'm so old. But like a lot of times we could just like memorize all of our contacts' phone
you
number.
Had to memorize phone numbers, social security numbers, addresses.
You could just memorize all your friends' phone number. And now like you scroll through people's contact list, and it's hundreds of names that they may talk to.
Other than the ones from childhood, like home phone, parents' cell phones, maybe my sister's cell phone, and my wife, mine. I don't even know my office number here at the church. I'm not going to lie. I'd have to Google that.
Yeah. So like that term of connectedness and feeling like what our expectations are socially is very broad now. Because even social media, being a part of social media, if you talk to a young person, a young teenager, there's a feeling of expectation there that is even derived from social media, social connectedness.
I think that's one of the things that people tend to take for granted is that what we will do is we will see different people doing different things, and then we have FOMO, that fear of missing out. And I think that's a big deal that people tend we tend to overlook that frequently. That can become a source of internalized expectation.
Yes.
And it's something you should address, because if you address it, then you're able to introspectively look into your own life and figure out, okay, well, this is what's causing me anxiety. This is what's causing me different issues here. Because here's the thing, right? External expectations, like external things that inform internal expectations, will then begin to inform your happiness about your life, your happiness with your current situation, which is completely anti-biblical, because it was a New Testament writer that would go on to say, whatever I find myself in, I'm going to be content. I think that's, or I think that's the problem that we tend to forget as people of God, is that God wants us to be content, and it is a trap. Discontentment is a trap that is easily beset many people.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that. We had a minor glitch. And so one of the things we were talking that I wanted to talk about is the role of projection in internal expectations. So projection is whenever we take like our feelings and project them onto someone else, or someone's perceived expectations and project them on ourselves. So why don't you talk about that? Like, what role does projection play there, and how we make those internal expectations, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So a lot of times when I talk to people about boundaries, they are being crushed under the weight of not having any boundaries, because they have perceived that other people or other organizations or other leadership figures or bosses have these expectations of them. Like, for example, that they have to be available 24 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And it's like, how can you be available 24 hours a day? And the person's like, well, I can't. But I feel like I'm expected to be. Yeah. And it's like, but that's not even realistic. Right. You can't be available 24 hours a day. Right. And there are many leaders out there. There are many pastors out there, many pastors' wives who are feeling crushed or feeling burdened down by all of the pressures of maybe what they perceive, or what may be the expectations of others and expectations of themselves, but that no one is able to realistically achieve that expectation of, I'm never going to make a mistake. I can be available 24 hours a day. I don't need sleep. I don't need rest. We cannot.
Yeah. It's
realistically, yes, but sometimes I think we would all be surprised at the amount of people that have unrealistic expectations on themselves.
And I think one of the key things in projection too is oftentimes, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but oftentimes if we are projecting someone's perceived expectations onto ourselves, they're often not actual expectations.
Sure.
And what we're doing is we are taking an internalized stressor, an internalized anxiety or fear, or an internalized expectation, and we are projecting that onto someone else by saying they expect me to do such and such, or be at such and such place, or whatever the case is. And I think it's important that we note that to bring clarity to a projection, you have to have open communication there.
Sure.
You have to be able to communicate about what is taking place, what is being said, and all those things, because you really want to understand and know the truth behind that. And the only way to do that is to have open lines of communication, and have the person communicate to you clearly what those expectations are. I love that as a person that's a leader. I want to communicate clearly what I expect of those that are working under me. But as a follower, I want clearly to the expectations to be clearly defined.
Sure.
And I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
Take the step in doing that and having those discussions.
Well, I think part of building those expectations is looking back to where the parameters of our expectations should come from anyway. And when we look back to God's word and we look at the Bible and we look at what God is expecting of us, that's how we develop our expectations.
Yeah.
There are some pastors and pastors' wives out there that are ministering to people, but sometimes they take on expectations of things that only God they're taking on roles that they feel like they're expected to fill, that only God can fill those expectations.
Yeah.
And the people they're serving. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think the thing is that divine, deriving our expectations from a divine source is the most important thing.
Sure.
Because here's the thing that we need to understand. Now, before we let me qualify this statement a little bit. There's always a cost in doing ministry. There's always a cost in working for the Lord. There's a cost in following Jesus.
Sure.
Alone following, much less working actively in ministry. So we're encouraged through Scripture to count the cost.
Sure.
Jesus gave parables discussing counting the cost. So there is a cost there. But should those things lead to us putting unrealistic expectations upon ourselves? Certainly not.
Sure.
And so we need to derive expectations from a divine source. What is expected of me from a biblical context as a leader, as a husband, as a father, as a spouse, as an employee? From a divine place, what is expected of me?
Well, I think when we look at God's word, and this is a huge concept for me, is that Jesus Christ on earth modeled to us how to live, but he also modeled humanity in the fact that he rested. Mm-hmm. If we remember Jesus praying in the garden, his humanity did not want to do what he was about to do. And he was like, not my will, but your will be done. Yes, but he was showing us the humanity of the role that he was taking on, and he modeled for us here on earth as he walked with the disciples. He walked alongside them.
That's such a good thing too, because it also models how to deal with expectations that don't seem realistic but are.
Sure.
Because Jesus in that moment did not want to go to the cross in his flesh.
Sure.
But in order to deal with those realistic expectations, he went in and prayed and put his flesh under subjection. Sure. And that's such a good thought too, because a lot of times I think one of the things that I'm worried about with all of these bad things that are the current political or social media climate, whatever the case is causing people to feel. One of the things that I worry about is that it will cause us to be weaker rather than stronger. And instead of going to God in prayer to overcome those things, we'll tend to walk away from those things because walking away is easier. And so I think the way to get through those, the way to process those, the first step is prayer.
Yes.
And that's what's so important. And that's why prayer is so vital to a person's life.
Absolutely.
Not just spirituality and walking with God, but just making it through day-to-day expectations.
Yeah. Right.
Prayer is vital to that.
Yes, absolutely. And we're not talking about pushing yourself to where you're not resting and you're trying to take on all these roles and you're trying to do all these things that you were never called to do. In my humble opinion, I feel like that's a form of pride when we try to be all the things in people's life and we take on roles that we were never meant to take on because of things that only God can fill in people's lives.
That, and two, taking on roles that it wasn't God's will for you to take on. I think that's one of the reasons that it's so important to really prayerfully consider roles in the church, leadership roles, and various things, because sometimes we do it out of need and necessity.
Yes.
And there's a place for that, for you to be doing that, because God needs that need to be fulfilled in a church. But it's also not God's will for you to be so overloaded that you cannot operate in any of the functions that you're called to operate in. And so, really, it's we have to have prayerful consideration when entering into things, because if it's God's will for you to do it, you're either going to learn a lesson or you're going to be successful. That's usually the two things that God is going to use those moments for: learn a lesson or be successful in what God's called you to do.
So realistically,
yes,
how do we break down on a practical level on how to manage our expectations and how to manage the expectations of others?
You would think by now that I'd be used to her asking me questions, but I'm not. It still gets me off guard. So ask the question again while I drink my water.
So how do we practically, because we've talked kind of abstractly about expectations. So how do we practically talk to our listeners who are pastors, leaders, evangelists, saints, workers, employees, that how do they manage? How do we manage our expectations on a daily level?
Yeah. I think firstly we have to look and analyze to see if the expectation is real.
Sure.
Is the expectation real, or is it projected from another external source?
Sure.
That's first and foremost. Then we begin to manage. Another way to manage expectations is finding out what is doable.
Sure.
When expectations are unrealistic, then oftentimes if they're unrealistic, then you can't succeed in those areas or you can't accomplish. Sure. And so if it is an unrealistic expectation, sometimes leaders will put seemingly unrealistic expectations on people because they know that they're able to rise to the challenge and meet those. And so if you feel like it's unrealistic, the thing would be to ask the person that you feel is putting that expectation on you to get some clarification there.
Sure.
And go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I have a real life kind of personal example of this. So as a pastor's wife, I have, and I think I've talked about this before, I have felt the expectation that I need to be at every event, everything that's happening. I need to be there, with my pastor's wife hat on and just ready to just roll into whatever's happening. However, I also have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old.
And they are fully 3 and fully 2, trust me.
Yes, we have 2 toddlers. And so what I have realized is that it is impossible for me to be at every single thing that my husband, the pastor, is going to be at. I cannot be at everything. Can I be at a lot of things? Yes. But I cannot realistically be at everything, especially if it's late at night. I have a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old who are used to going to bed fairly early. They are crying. Yeah. They are beside themselves. They're exhausted. And before I'm a pastor's wife, I'm a mother of 2 small children.
Right.
And so while I have at times felt really bad because I can't be at everything, I realize that I'm a mother first.
Yeah.
And I have to make sure that my children are taken care of and that I'm not setting them up for failure by taking them to an event, where they're just exhausted, they can't handle it, letting them cry, and, we're both stressed out trying to handle that and be at the event. And so managing that expectation has been extremely beneficial for me and for my children.
Yeah.
Because I realize I cannot be at everything. I cannot expect my kids to be at everything or really late night events because they're really small. But the time will come, they'll grow up and they'll be able to handle it. And I can be, at everything that I want to be at. And it's just a season of, and that's, my famous saying, it's just a season, but it's a season of where maybe I can't fully meet all the expectations that I have of myself, but realizing that also I have to line my expectations up with my overall priorities, and that the priority of being a mother is very important to me, and I have to manage my expectation to reach that priority.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is that in those times it's an internal expectation to be at everything.
Yeah.
Very rarely is it an external expectation, and so she exemplified how to manage that. She determined that it's not an external expectation; it's an internal expectation, and if it's internal, I can manage that.
Sure.
So that's a very, very important. If it's internal, you can manage it by setting up realistic goals and realistic expectations. If it's external, you have to talk about it and you have to figure out why and what needs to be accomplished there. Sure. I think one of the things I want to jump into that we just got a few minutes to talk about, but the title of this is the real versus the ideal. So what happens when expectations, internal or external, aren't met?
Yeah.
And how do we overcome that mental, emotional, spiritual taxation that comes there?
Sure. Well, I think it's like we kind of joked about earlier, but viewing those unmet expectations as a learning experience and a chance to regroup and maybe develop new expectations.
Yeah.
The striving part.
That's the big key.
Can be very healthy, but it can be unhealthy
as
well.
Be. Yeah, but it can be healthy.
But having a healthy response to saying, okay, I didn't quite meet my goal here.
Yeah.
But I did learn this and I've realized, for next time, maybe I can do this a little differently. What people tend to do is maybe when they don't meet their expectation is they start saying things like, oh, I'm a failure or I'm a loser or I can't do it. And we did a whole podcast session on positive thoughts. You need to go back and check it out if you haven't. But getting a preset kind of thing, thinking, okay, this is what I learned. This is what I need to do differently. And, moving forward, I'm going to set this expectation because it's just a little bit more realistic. I know I can accomplish this. I know I can do this. Let me set this expectation.
I would encourage you to, oftentimes if there is a failure, there are still things you did well.
Yes, absolutely.
I like to call them debriefs. I really like to do debriefs when possible.
Yeah.
To sit down and think about, okay, I did not succeed here, but what did I do well?
Sure.
And what did I not do well?
Sure.
This can be extremely helpful for future development because we're all, hopefully, if you're watching this, chances are you are interested in continued development as a person, a follower of Christ, whether in ministry or not. So we look at the pros or we look at what we accomplished, what we did well, what we didn't do well. But this can also be extremely helpful if you are if you have external expectations placed on you by a leader and you did not meet all those expectations. Then what you're able to do is that you are able to look at, okay, this is where I excelled and this is where I had struggles. So it can show you your strengths and your weaknesses, what you need to work on and what you don't. It can also show you giftings. What are you gifted at and what are you not gifted at? Where do you need help in this area, whether it be the help of another individual or personal improvement in that area. So it can be very beneficial to you.
And I think one thing is, and I want to say this because I feel like there's a lot of people that are maybe dealing with this. If you're a pastor or a ministry leader, sometimes because maybe a previous leadership or things that have happened in the past, maybe there's things that may be expected of you as a pastor or as a ministry leader, and you feel overwhelmed by the weight of those expectations. Mm-hmm. I think communicating lovingly and humbly with the people that you're leading is key. Thinking of a specific example, I know that when our church was a lot smaller, that the pastor handled a lot of the day-to-day, handled a lot of the issues. And like many churches, as the church has grown larger, it became more complicated for the pastor to handle all of the day-to-days, all of the calls, and so lovingly communicating with our people that there may be the expectation there that you do want to talk to the pastor and only exclusively the pastor. We love you for that. And we're glad that we appreciate you loving us so much. But because we want to serve you in the best way possible, and we want your needs to be met, that's not a realistic expectation. Yeah. We have a great team of leaders and ministers that we're working with, and we're all going to be here to serve you together. Yeah. So while it may not be the pastor that you speak with, you're going to speak with another minister. They are going to pray with you. They're going to be there for you. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if we need to get involved, we will, but they are more than capable. They're a seasoned minister. Yeah. They're here to serve you, and that is their desire to serve you. And I think communicating that humbly and lovingly, that I'm sorry we cannot meet this expectation, that we are the only ones available. Yeah. Does that make sense? I'm saying?
It does. I think, and it even applies to maybe marriage, that a husband and wife communicate clearly with love, expectations that the other one may have. And all for the other, and just the list goes on and on of where that is applicable. You know, I know we're about to finish up, but I think the one thing that I keep on thinking about is that we all strive for the ideal.
Absolutely.
That's the goal in everybody's life. And very, very rarely does it hit where ideal is 100% of the time.
Sure.
It will have a version of what we were shooting for, but oftentimes things will morph and things will change, and it may not be exactly what we thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important that we understand that it's God knows that. He knows, because it was ideal in the garden, but we were left with the reel of sin, and God's grace and mercy is big enough to overcome that reel.
Well, and here's the deal with that. This is what I always say. If we were able to kind of achieve the ideal every time, we're always able to, you know, things were always able to be exactly how we wanted them to be, you know, our heads would probably be so big we couldn't fit in this room.
Mine's actually that big already.
But it's through the messiness and maybe not through working through these expectations, and maybe through perceived failures or perceived shortcomings or perceived setbacks, that I believe that God really refines us. He works some things out of us. Yeah. And we're constantly reminded of how much we depend on him, because we will fail. Yeah. We will do things that maybe we're not 100% pleased with, but he never fails, and he's always there, and he is able to meet every expectation. Yeah. And as humans, we need that reminder. Yeah. I saw on a leadership, one of those leadership Instagrams that sometimes our setbacks are really God putting us in the right direction.
When you set back becomes a setup?
Yeah. Oh, that might be what it was. That's
they stole
kind of
that from a sermon.
Yeah, well, it's great. It's a great saying. Wherever they got it from, and whoever came up with that sermon, it's great.
It was an apostolic guy who
it's not a setback, but a set up. Yeah, and it is. It's a learning experience, and being able to regroup in our mind is a practice. It's a skill that we practice and say, you know, this didn't work out. Okay, but something else. Here we go. Let's regroup.
So, you know, it's an interesting thing, and this is I'm stopping with this because this could go on forever.
Yes.
The Bible says that His strength is made perfect in our weakness. His strength is made perfect in our weakness, and it just so happens that our weakness is one of the things that we are most uncomfortable with.
Oh, that's good.
And so I think that's really important. It's a good way to end, right?
Oh, that's so good.
Put a little cherry on it. You know, our weakness is something that we have to confront, and we do that sometimes through failure, expectations. We do that through dealing with the real instead of the ideal. Yeah. But His strength is made perfect in those times. Good. And so we thank you for joining us.
Yes.
And as always, if you have any questions, honey, give them that number.
Yeah. We want to hear your comments, your feedback. You can text the word THINK to 910-600-0498. And please leave us a question or a comment. We love hearing from you guys, and we're so thankful for all of you that tune in and listen to us. And you're watching the
Biblos Network.